What's the damn deal? It's JDays09 back again with another Warzone Mobile video. And today we're doing a little bit more min-max testing with the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V. I also want to talk about the PlayStation 5 Pro and NVIDIA's 50 series GPUs that are about to be launched pretty soon. Okay, now while we're here in the menus, what I've done is I've maxed out the settings for Warzone Mobile. Okay, uh, and we're gonna do a min max test to see throughout this video. You're gonna see with max settings and then some of those settings adjusted to see how the game runs. The interesting part about the Xperia Stream device that I have attached to my Sony smartphone is that while it cools the phone, I'm able to connect a battery pack externally that can power all of the components internally of the phone itself, which means that heat doesn't build up inside the phone while I'm doing that. There is a feature that the Sony Xperia lets you use. I'm not sure if other phones have it, but it's called HSPC, which I believe means heat sensitivity power control or something like that. What this does is it keeps the phone from using its own battery to power its components and instead uses the external charge, whether it's plugged in directly from a wall or from a power bank. I usually use this specifically when I'm connecting the phone to a TV, uh, or when I'm playing on the monitor on the bus on the way back from work, which is going to be really interesting because another development is that there's a new game that I have on my radar for mobile, specifically mobile. It's Destiny Rising. That's going to be a very interesting game to try out with the mobile setup because, again, I have a pretty long commute from work currently, taking anywhere from an hour to an hour and 45 minutes to get back from the Tesla factory. And so having some kind of entertainment while I'm on the bus ride during the commute. The mobile Xperia, it's just so good at filling in that gap because I can literally play what feels like a PlayStation on the go, like literally on the highway with 5G connectivity. It is one of the coolest things that I've never imagined even possible growing up and playing video games is that I'll be able to be on the highway and play. And it brings a whole nother conversation when you start talking about things like autonomous driving. Tesla just recently unveiled the fully autonomous Cybercab and Robovan and things that will enable people to really just kind of spend time together while they're moving around instead of having the driver being distracted with actually having to drive. So I do see some potential there for 5G and gaming and other forms of entertainment to kind of let people relax during their commute, right? Normally it can be stressful, especially with traffic and things like that. So there are reasons why those things could actually benefit people, give them a little bit more flexibility with how to spend their time during the day, even if they have a commute that's far from their home to work situation. But enough about that. I want to talk more about how this mobile experience that I'm having here is reminding me of what's happening within the console and PC market. And I want to bring up a new perspective, something that people aren't really focusing on within the conversation, because right now there's a lot of tension between PC gamers and console gamers, specifically PC versus PlayStation. For some reason, that's been a big point of discussion right now because of the price of the PlayStation 5 Pro. And of course, what we're finding out as these weeks go on, as we're approaching the release of the 50 series graphics cards, the prices of those are expected to be pretty high as well. These companies, they're not trying to screw over their consumers directly. This is literally because of a number of things. Inflation is one of them, but more importantly and more directly, it is the actual efficiency of their processes in these labs, these fabs, what you call them, these large facilities where they develop these transistors, these substrates, and nanochips and all these different nano electrical mechanical systems. Those are harder to make. It just are. As we get closer to the end of Moore's law, is what they say, right? The miniaturization is causing the actual materials themselves to basically go haywire because of how sensitive they are to everything, temperature, you know, and things like that, that can keep them from actually producing an efficient node used for a computer. And I'll give you an example. So Samsung, their 3 nanometer process is only at about 20 to 25% efficiency. TSMC, who's probably the best in the game, they're probably between 50 to 55% efficiency as of right now. And the reason why that's a big deal is because half of what they make is no good because of all of the defects that are showing up in their dies, right? So what does that mean? That means the 3 nanometer process is one that they can't use for mass production yet. So what that means is if they decide to make a new product using the 3 nanometer process, as of right now, it would have to be way more expensive, right? And even still, because of their continuous efforts with trying to develop a more efficient process, that's also going to carry over into their production because their production is going to cost them a lot to make. So even the current products, right, the 40 series, which I believe they actually have already stopped trying to make, they've already cut production on that to make way for the 50 series. What we want to pay attention to is what is the nanometer process they're using on the newest ones, right? Once we have concrete, um, you know, actual specs, that's going to be very telling. And then also, when you look at the price, you'll then understand why they're starting to creep up. It's because production is more costly now because of all of the defects in the miniaturization. So what's happening is that we're actually hitting a wall right now with computation and silicon. And these materials are not able to progress as quickly as they have been over the past 10 years. Right? If you look at the GTX 1080 Ti, it's an excellent GPU, which punched above its weight for many years. Now we're starting to have to implement AI technologies and things like that. We're going to keep the settings at basically maxed out, except now what we're going to do is we're going to cap the frame rate itself to 60. And the reason why I'm doing that is because there are times where I play Warzone Mobile while it's connected to like a big screen TV or a hotel room television, something that basically is not going to go beyond 60 anyways. So I want to see if I can get a solid 60 throughout the match, or at least most of the match. Um, and so there's no point in really trying to push it beyond that if you're going to, you know, display it on a big screen that doesn't go beyond 60 frames per second. Some TVs now can actually do that, so there's a time for that, but most TVs don't. So that's what I'm testing right now. And we're going to get back into this discussion about this AI stuff. But yeah, so that's what you're looking at here. Is see, it stays right at 60 frames. Um, and let's see how well it holds up. We're in some pretty interesting times when it comes to the gaming industry. You have the latest generation of RTX cards that is about to launch very soon. I'm assuming that within the next few weeks, we're going to get real concrete, information about the pricing, the technology, what size nanometer nodes they're using in these products. But what I want to talk about is how AI has been a crutch for the graphics industry, right? AI has been, I guess, more or less filling in the gaps during this phase of progression as it's starting to slow down to where it's almost an artificial progression. Well, I guess it literally is because AI does mean artificial intelligence, but the actual progression itself has been artificial because you're getting more frame rates now. You're getting supposedly a sharp image now. And in retrospect, you look at the actual upscaling technology, it does hold up. It does have a higher, sharper, resolution. But now you can run games at a lower resolution and still get what seems like a higher resolution. Play a game at 1080p, make it go to 4K. Play a game at 1440p, make it scale up to 4K, right? And consoles are really trying to hit that balance between frame rate and resolution. And technologies being used in the games. If you look at games during the PlayStation 3 generation, it was all about just trying to hit the resolution 720p, 1080p, 720p, 1080p. But it wasn't really like, how do I say, the things that are in the game, the components within the game did not always scale up. It was just okay, yeah, the outline looks good, but the textures may not have always been very high quality. Uh, Things like that, right? Now we're getting to the age where now everything has really high textures. And so it has increased the demand on these CPUs and GPUs exponentially. And so a lot of games struggle to hit their target frame rates, or at least a consistent frame rate, because of so much going on, so many processes going on, and then having all the, maxed out quality graphics and all that. Games have just gotten to the point where, one, they're very demanding on these systems, and two, they have gotten way more expensive to make. And so there has to be a balance struck within all of that for everything to move smoothly into the next generation. So obviously the bottleneck for the PS5 is the CPU at this point. And that was the same thing with the PlayStation 4 also. But the graphics card itself having the ability to do more graphical effects like ray tracing and things like that, that was the main focus, at least for the rest of this generation. And that was good for Sony to focus on the GPU, because these development companies want to use things like ray tracing to make the games look better, right? And that's why there's certain games that still run at 30 frames per second. But for consoles, the quality of the visuals is the most important thing. For PC games, the frame rates and the latency is the most important thing. And you can't tell me otherwise, because PC gamers will very quickly lower their settings if it means they get better frame rates, means they can perform better online, right? If you have a 244 hertz monitor, maybe something that goes beyond that, you're going to want to try to be at that higher end of frames as much as you possibly can with all the games that can go that high, right? Call of Duty is a really good example of that, because it runs very well even on the current gen consoles. But on PC, there is a distinct advantage when you do have more frame rates. But when it comes to this AI stuff that they're implementing, ray tracing and things like that, you're not using ray tracing on multiplayer. Why? Because it affects your frame rates, it affects your latency, right? So that's something that is going to be very interesting to see how the developers of the console architecture tackle these issues and challenges within the next generation of consoles. And frame generation is a new technique that has been introduced by NVIDIA, but it too is a crutch, because it may give you the illusion, or at least the effect, of smoother frames, but at the cost of latency. So where do you strike that balance? And then on top of that, what is that worth? What is the cost of those things? If you're going to spend 2,000 to 2,500 on a graphics card because you want to play Cyberpunk with path tracing, by all means do it. You know what I'm saying? But are you going to need that to hit 140, 160, 240 frames per second on a game like Call of Duty, Warzone, or Black Ops 6? PC gamers, they pay the price to get the technology first, and then console gamers get it later down the line for a much better deal, or at least a different iteration of it, because it's not exactly like the graphics cards that they get, but the technology is used. Like an example, ray tracing, right? Something that was pioneered by NVIDIA, and you had to have an NVIDIA graphics card to take advantage of it. But now AMD has their own version. Consoles are starting to use ray tracing and AI upscaling and things like that. So if you want to be first at something, you're going to have to pay the price. And even in our scale of things, in the PlayStation side of things, paying $700 for a console that wants to just push the envelope a little bit higher for a better experience, while still having the $500 console that has stayed the same price for 4 years, um, the people are starting to get a little bit more anxious about what the cost of these things are going to be. But I mean, with planning and discipline, you can save up for whatever the hell you want, right? You don't have to live check to check and then worry about some new thing coming out that's going to make you go broke. I don't think that's how you should plan to live your life in any kind of aspect. So always plan for things. You should be planning for the 50 series. You should be planning for the 60 series shortly after you get your graphics card for this generation, right? Same thing goes with everything. You don't want to spend too much, but you still want to get a good experience from it. And that's kind of where the industry is at right now, is that people are just kind of having to split themselves in two between the quality of the visuals and the performance of their frame rates and performance of their themselves on multiplayer games and things like that. But there are some games that come along every now and then that don't really require your best effort. Like Helldivers is a really good example because that's a multiplayer game, but it's a PvE type of game, right? Where you're teaming up with other players. Starship Troopers Extermination is a 16 player co op, which is incredible, but we're seeing how it's absolutely uh, limited on what it can do on current gen consoles, and that PC players are going to have a better experience overall. And so when these things happen, people are quick to blame the developers, but the truth is sometimes the developers are just limited to what they can do with the technology that they're given. So you can't always blame them. And besides, they got corporate cronies breathing down their necks to get it done by this due date, and then passion is lost in the process, and that's not cool. That's not good for the industry either. And that's what makes the gaming community feel like it's in a toxic state, like it is right now. But I don't think it's always going to be that way, because there's always a game that could come out that just makes everybody appreciate what everyone's effort is. And then, of course, the technology that we all have tries to take as best advantage of it as possible. Another example, which I'll be uploading on my channel, Predator Hunting Grounds. I played it on my PlayStation 5 and it looks fantastic. There are some frame hiccups in certain crazy situations, but the PS5 Pro is going to improve on those things. And I can't wait to play more of it on the PS5 Pro. Starship Troopers Extermination also is going to benefit from the ability of the PS5 Pro to produce those graphics at that solid 60 FPS, but it still could be bottlenecked by the CPU itself, which tells you what, okay, yeah, this is probably going to be best experience on a PC. But it always does come down to what the developers focus on, right? If they're focused on the consoles because there's a higher player base there, they're going to focus on that. And then their experience may be, hell, even somewhat better than PC's experience, at least for a while, until those things get ironed out. But yeah, games like Helldivers, that's going to be great on the PS5 Pro. I'm finally going to get to see it at a high enough quality to where I want to play it on a big screen TV. Right? Like, I'm excited about that shit. I'm willing to pay for that shit. You know what I mean? Um, PC gamers typically play on a monitor, so they don't have to push the envelope as hard when it comes to the resolution and things like that. But even still, the upscaling still gives you what you want, right? I play this game on a phone that has a 4K screen. It's overkill, absolute overkill. But I have terrible eyes, and so every pixel matters for my eyesight, right? So I appreciate its ability to do so, but it's a smaller screen, just like a monitor is a smaller screen. But playing on a big screen TV is something that is more catered towards a console, and that's why graphical quality is the primary thing for consoles and not so much the frame rates. It's only now that gamers are starting to use consoles on monitors that go beyond 60 frames, or TVs that go beyond 60 frames, that performance is becoming a part of the conversation for consoles as well. But also latency, because people that are on consoles, they want to be competitive in games like Call of Duty, Counter Strike, Valorant, just games that are multiplayer focused. You know, and though I have a back catalog of single player games to burn through, I'm still going to be playing games like Helldivers and Predator and Starship Troopers, and that's going to be all benefited from having the PS5 Pro, and that's why I'm excited about those things. But looking forward to the next generation, what is it that the next gen consoles are going to need? They're going to need as close to the newest technology CPUs as possible and as close to the newest technology of GPUs as possible. We're not going to want a cut rate GPU or a cut rate CPU. We're going to want a higher quality and something that's going to hold us for more than 4 years. And I think that the next console generation should be a little bit more expensive if it means that the next gen consoles are designed to punch above their weight. And I think that that anticipation is what is causing a lot of the tension between the console gamers that are hardcore and the PC gamers that are hardcore. Because mind you, most PC gamers don't even use the latest tech; they use older components. But it is the conversations had by the elitists that are why these things are being brought to the forefront. And I get it; they should be talking about it because there are devices that are being created that are starting to get closer to what their devices that they spent a lot of extra money on is starting to, the performance is starting to get a little bit closer. I'm not going to say the frame rates are going to be closer, but if I'm able to play Black Ops 6 at 120 frames per second on a console, that's going to at least allow me to compete against PC gamers to some extent. Hell, me playing on this mobile platform here is just kind of showing this in real time, the difference between people that prioritize frame rates versus people that are just playing on their phone with their thumbs and stuff like that. I'm using my high refresh rate screen with the controller. You know what I'm saying? I make I'm given that freedom to do those things, and that's what's making my experience so much fun when I'm playing this. I'm getting chopper gunners left and right. I'm taking on 3 people at the same time. I'm getting killed in the process too, but I'm having a lot of fun doing it, and that's why it's like that. So versatility is important in the next gen. I think that that's something that was overlooked. I think that graphical quality was the focus of this gen, but I think the versatility of having high-end graphics and also high-end performance is something that next gen should look at. So the next generation of high performance consoles, like whatever Xbox wants to do, I don't know if they're going to, and what PlayStation wants to do, is that it should be shooting for a possibility of getting to 240 frames per second on the next gen console. The possibility of a game that, of course, compromises its graphical settings, but also has the ability to run really high tech, really high quality graphical settings for those single player games, or maybe even some of those games that kind of strike that middle ground, right? Um, that go for multiplayer experiences that are co-op or things like that. That's one of the reasons why Destiny was such a good console game. Destiny 1, when it launched on PlayStation 4, it was on PS3 also, but PlayStation 4, it was so perfect because it maxed at 30 frames per second, but that kind of didn't matter as much because most of the game was PvE. And then when Destiny 2 came out, the PS4 and PS4 Pro were bottlenecked to where they could not play Destiny 2 beyond 30 frames. And that's when people were starting to realize, wait, I actually want the multiplayer experience to be better, right? So Destiny 2 is in a good position now because it strikes that middle ground. They have 60 frames per second for the single player, and then they have 120 frames per second for the multiplayer part of the game. And I think that that's excellent that they've done that. I'm actually about to re-download that when I get my PS5 Pro, just because I appreciate when a developer really pushes the limit on both ends, makes the experience good for both sides of the coin. People that play on single player can enjoy that experience, or that co-op experience, and then people that play multiplayer can enjoy that experience, and then the actual technology and the development of the game is catered towards that, and then they hit that consistently. That's something that's very important. I eventually want to do a deep dive into the technology aspect of the gaming industry and how it affects pricing and how it affects our opinions ultimately on who's getting the better deal and who's getting the best tech. Um, but I want more information as to where it's actually at right now, where the technology is at. I remember when I was studying nanotechnology in college, one of the aspects of computation that was being looked at as a potential replacement of the silicon is something called it's called DNA technology. And DNA technology is sounds blasphemous as it is, because it kind of is. Like, I didn't like the idea, but the potential that they were talking about in these books that I was reading of was just insane. It was like 1 gram of brain matter is equal to like 145 trillion gigabytes or some crazy amount. It was a lot of the ability of organic matter, as far as its ability to computate brain matter specifically, is insane. Harnessing that, and that's it was like, whoa, y'all are really gonna take brain matter and turn that into an actual computer? That would just be very unethical. But the possibilities with that was something that was considered, or at least may still be considered, aside from like quantum computation and things like that. So I don't know where that has actually gone. Maybe that's somehow let its way into your iPhone. I don't know, but it's like, whoa, like there's whatever is going to replace the silicon wafer is going to be a major leap. I think that's really what it comes down to. The once this threshold gets pushed past, the technology is going to have to take a completely different approach. You know, programming, as you know, it's going to change. Software development is going to change. Hell, video games are going to change. If it ever gets to that point, you know, we could probably hit a world war before that'll even happen anyway. So I'm not that I'm being pessimistic. I'm just saying like that it's going to take a long time for that to be practical for production and things like that. But those are conversations that are being had by actual scientists, and that's something that people don't actually look at it from that aspect. They just look at it from the economic aspect and the industrial aspect of it, of what's available. But I like to know how things work. I like to look into the further details on all those things. I can understand them. When I hear technical presentations, I tend to understand, at least follow along with it pretty well. You know, I remember when the PS3 was first announced, they were talking about the cell processor. I was like, hey, I kind of understand this. Like, I may not know all the aspects of the actual, like, mathematics involved with that stuff, at least, the calculus that it takes to get to that point. But, like, I understand why it would be the way that it is, you know. I had done workshops at UTSA about photolithography and photovoltaics and substrates and different technology of nanomaterials and how they can affect progress for these things in the future. And of course, silicon is what's used now, but imagine the capabilities of gold, of silver, and their semiconductor properties. Those are things that, of course, would not necessarily be plausible for mass production, but to some extent, used in the nanoscale, can also be a material that can push the boundaries of computation as we know it now. And I believe that those things may have actually been used in some of our products already, but seeing how they are used to progress the technology in its next phase would be interesting, because you have to again strike that balance between cost and efficiency. And it's kind of crazy how that translates into everything that we see, because even in that case, I'm striking a balance here and I'm pushing the minimum specs of the graphics while trying to push the maximum performance of the frame rates. And from what I recall, because I didn't actually track my FPS during this particular match, but this match and the match before it, I actually was easily getting over 100 frames per second, pushing upwards of 111 to 120 frames per second during my actual gameplay. But I have to be on debug mode to do that, to track it, and I was actually recording this while playing on the bus, so I didn't actually get the frame rates because I have to be on Wi-Fi to do that. So you're not seeing that data through this match, but I can assure you that the for the most part it was running smooth. I was getting some intermittent internet connections, so the hiccups that you're seeing in the frame rates is not from the chip on the phone. It's actually the internet connection. The phone was running really smooth though, and so I was able to go on a pretty good kill streak because of that. And that's kind of what where I'm at with the gaming because I'm torn between those two options as well. I like to play games on high graphics, even if it is a competitive game. You know, I like to strike that balance though between having it look good and then also being able to perform the way that I know I can perform on competitive multiplayer games like that. I'm gonna be honest with you. During the first half of this console generation, I feel like I've focused mainly on multiplayer games, not the single player ones, or even co-op games. Helldivers is an example. Call of Duty mainly. It's just kind of been like one of those things, and that's part of the reason why this console generation has felt, for at least me, a little bit more stagnant because it's more so about the third party games and not so much about the first party exclusives for me. The first party exclusives that I would like to see should be a first person shooter. That's just my opinion because my favorite era, when I think about my favorite era of gaming, it was Killzone 2, Dust 514, Resistance. Those games were the ones that made me really excited to have a PlayStation 3. And while I'll always support Sony's, first party games and the games that they make, that has not been the focus for me. But the PS5 Pro, I think, is gonna have me focus more on some of those other single player games. And so I plan to be playing some of those. I'm also getting Space Marine 2. We gotta support good games. This has been Janiz09. Talk to you next time.